Hey everyone, for this PowerPoint, we're going to go over Oedipus Rex, which is the Latin name of, in English, it means Oedipus the King. So our playwright is Sophocles, who's born around 496 BCE, died around 406 BCE. Um, he's part of classical Athens' three greatest tragic playwrights, who also include Aeschylus and Euripides. And we only have so many extant tragedies, so any surviving tragedies from the Greek tragic period where a lot of these were written, and they're mostly from these three playwrights. There may have been other playwrights, other plays, but they have been lost to history so far. Now, Sophocles is best known for the Oedipus cycle, Oedipus Rex, which we read of the plague affecting the city, and the king Oedipus Rex or Oedipus and his wife Jocasta trying to find out what is going on, why is this plague hurting our people, and learning how they did not escape the fate for Oedipus of killing his father and marrying his mother. Antigone continues this tragic tale, talking about um, after Oedipus goes into exile, the new king that's supposed to take over is Oedipus's wishes were that his two sons would co-rule, and they instead fight for who is going to rule. They end up killing each other in battle, and then Creon, Jocasta's brother, takes over since there's now a lack of male heirs. And he declares that the brother who fought for his city will be given full funeral rights, and the brother who turned against and decided to fight against Oedipus's declaration. Recognizes declared that the rule is that everyone is supposed to have funeral rights or they won't be able to move on to the underworld. They will be forced to roam the earth for the rest of eternity. And she breaks the rule of man to follow the rule of the gods, has a wonderful lesson about when do we follow the rules of man when they're just or unjust, as well as what do we do when the rules of the gods go against the rules of man. And Oedipus at Colonus finishes the cycle talking about Oedipus before his death. All of these three cycles are based on the myth of Oedipus, following the Greek classical tradition of writing plays about mythology that people commonly knew. As we talked about in the drama presentation, this allowed the playwright to say something by or teach a lesson while using something the audience would know by controlling the audience's reaction. So the play that we focus on, Oedipus Rex, like I said, it's Latin for Oedipus the King. In Greek was Oedipus Tyrannos. Oedipus comes from it's a combo word for swollen foot. So the part of the myth, the way this myth goes, that's not related directly to the play. The myth starts with Jocasta and her first husband. They have Oedipus. They go to an oracle who's kind of like not necessarily a prophet, but a prophetic person who's supposed to be able to tell the future. The oracle says that their young son will grow up to kill his father and marry his mother and will be known by his swollen feet. And they decide that, well, we absolutely cannot allow this to happen, especially the incestuous relationship, as well as, patricide and technically king killing, regicide. Um, so the easiest way to avoid this fate is to simply kill our son. But of course, they're not going to do it themselves because that could anger the gods. So they decide that they are going to nail his feet together so that he can't escape, because how a baby can escape the wilderness is beyond me. But they give the child to a servant who is supposed to drop Oedipus into the mountains where he will basically die, being left in the wilderness. And the servant can't do it. The servant frees Oedipus once they're in the mountains, goes to a town beyond the mountains, and gives the child to a childless couple. Oedipus grows up with them, and he learns of his fate as an adult. And because he doesn't know that he's adopted, figures that he will change his fate by leaving his family without telling them what's going on in order to make sure that his family is protected. So he goes over the mountains. He ends up meeting the previous king on the road, or a king on the road doesn't know that it's his father, and they get into a duel, and Oedipus kills his father, who again, he doesn't know it's his father, it's just a random king to him, and he doesn't even know it's a king, it's just another person to him who was harassing him on the road. He also finds out about his chance to be a hero, that there is a sphinx that is threatening a nearby town, and that he goes to defeat the sphinx, who gives him the famous riddle, what walks by four legs in the morning, two in the afternoon, and three in the evening. The answer being man, because as we've talked about before, a day represents a life metaphorically in literature. So a man walks as on four legs as a toddler, then on two legs as a young adult and adult, and then two legs plus a cane in their old age in the evening. So he goes to the town, reports that the Sphinx has been defeated and will not bother them anymore. And um, they the town tells Oedipus, "Well, our king has been killed, and we have, to thank you. You can marry his widow." Of course, he doesn't know that this is his mother. He marries Jocasta, has four children with her, and then the plague comes that starts our play. So our play starts after Oedipus has been king for many years, again, knowing that there is a plague and Oedipus is going to find out the reason. So he calls upon the prophet Tiresias. Tiresias knows what's going on, but has kept silent because it was better for everyone not to know. And it's despite the plague. And he warns uh, Oedipus about the dangers of seeking the truth. So, with this particular story, um, we have the hubris of Jocasta, going throughout life thinking her problems have been solved because she killed her kid. Clearly, that didn't matter. We also get a lot of hubris from Oedipus. He's also, Oedipus Tyrannos, not just king, but Tyrannos is where we get the word tyrannical. And you can see by the way that he treats people that he's not the best king. Now, the twist at the end of the play, where Oedipus and Jocasta learn that his fate was not avoided, that he still married his mother and had an incestuous relationship with her, that is something that, well, it is a twist for modern audiences who don't know the myth. The audience going into the play would have known how Oedipus became king and that he's married to his mother Jocasta. So this allows it not to have been a big surprise to the audience. So that controls the reaction of the audience. So the playwright can focus more on the lesson that needs to be learned from Oedipus's actions and Jocasta's to a point. This is also part of what's known as dramatic irony. The audience knows something about what is going on that the characters do not. Now, it's not common anymore in literature that it's because the audience has prior knowledge that they understand what's going to happen. It's more often that, especially in plays, in films, to a small point in literature, we, like stories and novels, we get some kind of hint about what is going on that the main character doesn't know. So, for example, um, in Shakespeare plays or in even modern movies sometimes, we'll have scenes where you see what's going on, you understand the bad guy's plan. So then you kind of know, oh, I know something that the main character doesn't know. I can't warn them of it though. So, a great example would be Othello, from Shakespeare, where we get scenes where we know Iago is jealous. We know he wants to hurt Othello. We know he wants to undermine Othello's authority and promote himself, and that he sets up Desdemona for failure and to be harmed by Othello. And again, we can't do anything, but the audience knows what Othello doesn't know. We get this even in modern movies. For example, The Lion King that we talked about at the very beginning of the class. We get a whole scene of a song of how Scar is evil and his evil plans that he's going to kill Mufasa and Simba. And as the movie progresses, and Simba thinks it's his fault that his father died, and that, you know, people don't realize that Mufasa was killed by Scar and don't realize that Scar's evil. We know that he is. That's all part of what's called dramatic irony. Now, it's different than regular irony. Regular irony is when you believe something is going to work out one way and it works out the complete opposite way as what it seems. Dramatic irony is where it specifically refers to the audience knowing something that the main character doesn't. All right. So the main lesson learned from Oedipus is that attempting to change one's fate may lead one into the very destiny they meant to avoid. This is very common with anything requiring prediction of fate in Greek mythology and Greek tragedy and drama. Anytime a character tries to do something to change their fate, their fate ends up working out exactly the way it was meant to, because fate is kind of like a universal essence that cannot be changed, even to the gods. The gods cannot change fate. It is what it is. Now, if it's the gods dictating what the fate is, again, you most of these plays show you cannot change what the gods' desire is. So we get less of this as drama and literature evolves throughout history, and it becomes less about the gods and fate controlling our lives and more about how our actions control fate. Now, one of the reasons this play in particular in the myth is very famous is because of Freud. He's a psychoanalyst and he used this myth to create his famous Oedipus complex, which claimed that all children's first love is their parents, meaning first romantic love, not just general love, and that in order to have normal relationships as adults, a child must reject the romantic love feelings for their parent, any sexual feelings for their parent, in order to have normal, adjusted relationships. And I put in there here, Freud is kind of weird in this point because a lot of people are like, no, that doesn't make sense. Children don't have that kind of, there are different kinds of love. Even in Greek, there were different words for the different kinds of love, familial versus romantic versus sexual versus, friendship love. You know, there are many different kinds of love. And it's called the Oedipus complex for boys because of Oedipus marrying his mother Jocasta. For girls, Freud's assistant called it the Electra complex. Electra is the second daughter of Agamemnon. And as we've detailed before, Agamemnon is killed by his wife Clytemnestra. In the second play in the Agamemnon cycle, um, Clytemnestra is killed by her son and her daughter Electra as revenge against their father, and Electra's devotion to Agamemnon, despite his killing of her sister Iphigenia, despite his own flaws, leads many to see, the devotion to the father figure as a similar to the Oedipus complex, but for girls. All right, some themes in this particular play, fate versus free will, again, which has the bigger role in our lives. Now, in Greek tragedy, we would argue fate has the bigger, the gods, and fate has the bigger because you can't fight what you're destined to do. And every time you try to, you end up making it happen anyway. Obviously, in later plays, we get the fact that free will is more common and that our actions are going to depict what our fate is. So, for example, audiences of Sophocles' Oedipus Rex would say that, no matter what Oedipus did, he was always going to play into the hands of fate. Whereas audiences of Shakespeare's Hamlet would show that Hamlet's actions ended up causing not just his own fate, but everyone else's. There is a big theme of wisdom versus knowledge. They are two very different concepts. And the best way to really, that I've ever seen to explain them is that knowledge is knowing tomato is a fruit, wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. That's the best way I've seen to explain the difference, between them. Also, here in Dungeons and Dragons, there's some good ideas between intelligence versus wisdom. But think of it this way: although Oedipus is a seeker of knowledge, it is against all wisdom to pursue this knowledge. He wants to know what is the reason causing the plague, but no matter who tells him, especially Tiresias, the prophet, he doesn't learn that it's not a good idea to pursue the knowledge. And this is something we also see in Frankenstein. Again, Dr. Frankenstein, Victor, wants to pursue the knowledge against all advice to pursue the natural philosophy, against all wisdom of whether it's a good idea or not, until he gets to he wisens up a little bit with not creating the creature's mate because he realizes it will have free will and consciousness. But again, we had talked with Frankenstein even about fate versus free will because Victor says throughout the novel that he was powerless to stop his fate, but if the point that he could have made decisions, it was his decision that caused his fate, not some predetermined fate. There's also a theme of determination. Stubbornness and persistence is good sometimes. This is one of those things where stubbornness can be both a flaw and a strength, because stubbornness in the idea of persistence through adversity is definitely a strength, but not knowing when to give up is a weakness as well. Now, obviously, this play makes it very difficult because, yes, the fact that Oedipus was determined to know the truth, caused problems for him and his family, caused a war in later plays, caused, all kinds of political upheaval for the citizens of Thebes. There's a lot of problems that stem from him knowing the truth. But if he hadn't learned the truth, his city still would have been, affected by the plague. So in the scheme of things, it is very tricky as to knowing which was the better option here. There's also a theme of memory and the past, that delving too far into the past is dangerous, forgetting is good. This is something that especially Tiresias's warnings portrays. And also an idea of power. Power corrupts people. Oedipus is cruel to those around him because he's afraid of people stealing his power. His major fault is hubris. So, thinking that he is untouchable by anything, that is, a major problem, and he takes it out on those around him. Some symbolism, imagery, and allegory. The eyes, vision, and blindness. So besides the many, many instances referring to sight and or blindness and speaking of the truth, it's especially highlighted in the interaction between Tiresias and Oedipus. Tiresias is blind physically, yet he can see the truth and he can see the wisdom in not seeking the truth on Oedipus's part. Oedipus can physically see, but he is blind to the truth and he is blind to the wisdom about seeking the truth. And when Oedipus finally sees the truth, he blinds himself in the play. The scars on Oedipus's feet are a little bit of symbolic because of the prophecy. It shows that Oedipus has been marked to suffer since birth, forever damned no matter what he did. But there's some irony, not the dramatic kind, in the fact that neither he nor Jocasta recognized it until the end as a sign of who he was. Jocasta was told that the child who would kill his father and marry his mother would be marked by his swollen feet and the scars of where the nails were in his feet. So she must have been really blind and hubristic again to not notice and remember the prophecy. You know, she goes to bed with him every night for all these years. She has adult children with him, and she never notices that he has scars on his feet, doesn't ask about his swollen, scarred feet and scar tissue. You know, there's some irony to that. There's also a little bit of a symbol of the crossroads because although we don't get a crossroads in the play itself, most of the all of the action takes place at the palace. The crossroads where Oedipus met the previous king, his father, we've talked about the crossroads being a traditional symbol of choices. Oedipus could have walked away and not dueled this random person. The other person could have randomly not dueled. And, again, the father knew the prophecy that one day he would meet a man that he does not recognize as his son and duel him and be killed. And he chose to do it anyway. And that kind of sets off. So a lot of the, choices of the parents, Jocasta and her first husband, the king, set off in motion a lot of these problems later on. All right, so that is everything for Oedipus Rex. And the next video will go over Midsummer Night's Dream.